I remember reading the New York Times and opening up the magazine, and there was this cocky, flamboyant, look at me, I am Mr. Untouchable.
Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're counting down our picks for the top 10 American gangsters who faced justice.
His exploits were legendary, rising as he did, becoming the boss in Chicago, and then his downfall.
For this list, we'll be looking at some of the biggest American mobsters in the 20th century that were caught by the law and faced criminal punishment. Let us know which American gangster you think was the biggest crime bust of them all down in the comments. Number 10, James Joseph Bulger Jr., aka Whitey Bulger. James Joseph Whitey Bulger was a notorious Irish-American mobster that led the organized crime scene in Boston from the 70s to the 90s.
Bulger, Flemmi, and Weeks immediately moved into the store, changing its name to the South Boston Liquor Mart, running their illegal businesses from the back room.
While controlling Boston rackets, Bulger left a trail of bodies as a result of his violent and murderous outbursts. But justice never came for those victims because of Bulger's corrupt role as an FBI informant.
They figured they'll turn a blind eye to rackets and numbers and some of the, busting, machines and that kind of stuff. But they also turned a blind eye to 19 murders.
It wasn't until 1994 that the corruption was brought to light and Bulger went dark. Though Bulger was only placed on the FBI's top 10 most wanted list in 1999, he was a fugitive for 16 years, up until he was captured in 2011 in Santa Monica, California. By this point, he was no longer a Southie gangster, but an aging old man.
There was a feeling of resignation.
I don't think he had it. I did ask him, I said, hey, Whitey, I said, aren't you relieved that you don't have to look over your shoulder anymore and it's come to an end? And he said, are you nuts?
While about to turn 84, Whitey Bulger was found guilty on 31 counts, including participation in 11 murders, and was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences plus 5 years. Number 9, Nicky Barnes, aka Mr. Untouchable. Leroy Nicholas Barnes, or Mr. Untouchable, flooded Harlem and other neighborhoods in New York, Pennsylvania, and even some in Canada with heroin during the 1970s.
I had the businessman's persona. I wanted powder. I wanted a lot of powder. That's the reputation that I had among Italians. If you got it and it's good, give it to me.
By forming the Council, a crime syndicate of black men, Barnes dangerously rose to become one of the country's most notorious dope dealers while amassing millions.
Money was so important and so valuable that this was the pinnacle against which we measured everything. That's what the American dream is all about. Getting money and getting things.
With his money hidden in several other assets, Barnes comfortably dodged arrest and even appeared to be taunting law enforcement when he posed for a New York Times feature. However, the need to crack down on substance use in the streets of New York was rising, as was the demand to bring in Barnes. Unable to withstand Barnes's notoriety, then-President Jimmy Carter ordered Barnes to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law.
The focus was, we are targeting Barnes because he was Mr. Untouchable.
In 1978, Barnes was convicted to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Number 8, Vito Genovese. When looking at organized crime in the 20th century, the name Vito Genovese will always make an appearance.
Vito Genovese was never anything but a homicidal maniac.
Probably the most despicable gangster ever to run the streets of this city.
Not only was he the right-hand man to notorious crime boss Charles Lucky Luciano, but Genovese was also friends with Benito Mussolini and allegedly approved the slaying of a reporter who didn't support the dictator. Needless to say, Genovese was not a man you wanted to cross.
Murder was just a ritual with him. He had no conscience.
His ruthless desire to be the boss of bosses went as far as ordering hits on big bosses like Albert Anastasia and Frank Costello. Despite Genovese's name being connected to several mob crimes, police were unable to hold him behind bars long. But as years went on, Genovese got sloppy, and law enforcement cracked down on organized crime. In 1959, Genovese could no longer outrun his crimes, and was convicted on narcotics conspiracy charges and sentenced to 15 years in prison.
On April the 17th, 1959, the man who had gotten away with murder for so long was finally nailed in a Manhattan federal court.
Number 7, Charles Luciano, aka Lucky Luciano. Considered the father of modern American organized crime, Charles Lucky Luciano was responsible for the creation of the Commission, a governing body that supervised mafia activities across the United States.
He gathered around him the heads of the major crime families in New York City, Chicago, and Buffalo, and made them into a board of directors. He called it the Commission. To avoid turf battles and maximize profits, they divvied up the rackets.
Luciano had several criminal rings that involved racketeering, sex work, bootlegging, gambling, and more. As the Luciano family's reputation and power grew in the world of organized crime, so did the attention from the law.
It was very dangerous. Polanski always said, they'll nail you for this. This is inviting trouble that you don't need. But he loved being Charlie Lucky Luciano, the #1 gangster in town. And he liked to be seen and celebrated.
Prosecutor Thomas Dewey and attorney Eunice Carter led investigations on Luciano's connection to sex work rings. In 1936, Luciano was arrested and swiftly convicted for compulsory prostitution and sentenced to 30 to 50 years in prison.
It was a bombshell. It had tremendous impact politically, socially, and economically on organized crime and on the people of the city of New York.
Number 6, Frank Costello. The American gangster film genre and Francis Ford Coppola's The Godfather may not have been possible without the influence of the real-life mob boss Frank Costello. After Lucky Luciano was imprisoned and Vito Genovese fled the country, Costello was appointed as acting crime boss and took control of all of Luciano's operations, earning just as much respect and notoriety as his predecessor.
Costello was the ultimate diplomat, the ultimate Machiavellian. He was the chess man who could move the pieces around the board so that everything would work out for everyone.
It wasn't until the Kefauver hearings, a 1950s investigation on organized crime led by the U.S. Senate, that Costello would be caught in the legal system. The hearings not only exposed Costello's weakness under the scrutiny of law, but also exposed the truth of the mafia empire to the public masses.
Costello had been publicly destroyed by the exposure, and he left the Kefauver Committee hearings as the Justice Department's #1 target.
Costello lost his influence in the mafia and was convicted of contempt of the Senate, leading to an 18-month prison sentence. He was later indicted for tax evasion and sentenced for 5 years. Even after prison and his retirement from the mafia, the prime minister of the underworld would continue to be tied up in legal battles until his death in 1973.
When you are the prime minister, the man who can work the miracles, and all of a sudden you fall off your horse and fall on your face, you are not prime minister anymore.
Number 5, Mickey Cohen. The City of Angels also had its fair share of mafia activities, and Mickey Cohen was one of its players. Though the New York-born Cohen spent some time in LA and Chicago in his early years, it was to help fellow mobster Bugsy Siegel control the rackets and develop the race wire that made Cohen settle on the West as his home base.
The race wire broadcast results to bookmaking rooms throughout Los Angeles so that people could lay bets up to the last moment.
When Siegel was assassinated in 1947, Cohen became the mob king of LA. He had several fronts as well as real businesses throughout LA: jewelry shops, ice cream trucks, gas stations, and supper clubs.
Cohen also opened popular restaurants all over the city that had illegal sports betting operations and craps tables in back.
It was rumored that Cohen was also the center of prostitution and blackmail operations in Hollywood. Cohen's celebrity gangster status dimmed in 1951 when he was convicted for tax evasion and sentenced to 4 years, and then convicted again in 1961, serving his sentence at Alcatraz.
Unlike his last prison stint, Mickey was treated as just another inmate. No special treatment.
Number 4, George Kelly Barnes, aka Machine Gun Kelly. Not to be confused with modern-day rapper MGK, George Machine Gun Kelly was a famous American gangster during the Prohibition era. Kelly's criminal reputation began with bootlegging and then escalated to armed robberies and kidnappings. It was actually his wife, Catherine Thorne, who gave him his first machine gun and helped him get his name and reputation out there amongst his fellow criminals. In July 1933, Kelly gained the attention of the FBI by kidnapping a wealthy oil man for a ransom of $200,000, equivalent to about $4.5 million today.
Kirkpatrick, who delivered the $200,000 ransom July 30th in Kansas City to a man later identified as Kelly. Urschel was released at this spot near Norman, Oklahoma.
With Kelly robbing banks dry and kidnapping men for money, the FBI was scrambling to lock him up for good. On September 26, 1933, Kelly and his wife were finally caught and sentenced to life in prison.
It's the judgment of the court that George R. Kelly be sentenced to the federal penitentiary for the term of his natural life.
Number 3, John Gotti. Just like Genovese, mobster John Gotti was bloodthirsty to be the boss of the Gambino family.
But how did he make that money? By killing, by robbing, by manipulating, by bribing, by controlling rackets that he didn't have a right to control.
In 1985, Gotti had orchestrated the murder of the Gambino family's boss, Paul Castellano, and his right-hand man, Thomas Bellotti. With Castellano eliminated, Gotti took over the Gambino family and rose to be a celebrity gangster on the streets of New York.
Out of jail, John Gotti resumed his celebrity status. Around town, he was seen at fine restaurants and glitzy nightclubs, always immaculately dressed.
He was either known as the Dapper Don for his fancy suits or the Teflon Don because authorities were unable to stick serious criminal charges on him. But through wiretapping, constant surveillance, and some help from Gotti's underboss Salvador Sammy the Bull Gravano, the FBI arrested Gotti and later convicted him on multiple charges in 1992, including for the murders of Castellano and Bellotti.
On April 2, 1992, John Gotti was convicted of 5 murders, including Paul Castellano's and Tommy Bellotti's. He also was found guilty of other crimes under the umbrella of obstruction of justice and racketeering.
Number 2, Frank Lucas. Rivaling Leroy Nicky Barnes, Kingpin Frank Lucas created an international drug ring that expanded from New York to Southeast Asia in the 60s and 70s.
It's okay for people to respect you, but when they fear you, now you got the power.
He was most infamously known for providing the streets of Harlem with a version of heroin known as Blue Magic. Lucas reportedly entered the world of organized crime and dope dealing under the guidance of notorious Harlem gangster Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. When Johnson died in 1968, Lucas essentially replaced him as a Harlem crime boss, expanding his criminal operations to a whole new level of wealth and notoriety.
I ran Harlem with iron fist. I told him what to do, where to go, and who to talk to, and how to do it.
His international drug trafficking led to the exploitation and deaths of many caught in his scheme for money and power. But his drug empire came to an end when his house was raided in 1975 and he was sentenced to 70 years in prison, though that was reduced and modified in subsequent years for various reasons.
Lucas cut a deal with the U.S. Attorney to have his sentence reduced, providing information that would assist in the arrest of almost 100 gangsters.
Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into Settings and switch on your notifications. Number 1, Al Capone. One of the biggest catches of them all in mob history was that of Al Capone, the original public enemy number 1. Out of all of the American gangsters, Al Capone is most famously known and celebrated due to pop culture's romanticization of his criminal lifestyle.
He was on the cover of Time magazine as Man of the Year.
He was as big a celebrity in his field as Babe Ruth was in baseball.
From bootlegging to gambling rackets, Al Capone controlled the streets of Chicago with his crime syndicate, the Chicago Outfit. One of Capone's deadliest acts as crime boss was the supposed ordering of one of the bloodiest hits of the century, the 1929 St. Valentine's Day Massacre.
It's pretty devastating to Bugs Moran's gang. It's also going to end up being devastating to Al Capone's gang.
As the violence in Chicago increased, so did the hunt to build a case against Capone and imprison him. In 1931, federal investigators followed the money and found Capone guilty of income tax evasion and sentenced him to 11 years in prison.
Normally, people who were convicted of income tax evasion might get 18 months or 2 years, but the judge gave Al 11 years.
Check out these other clips from WatchMojo, and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.